Imagine being told that the most dangerous weapon in history wasn't a sword, a bow, or some terrifying siege machine. It wasn't even an army, it was paperwork, not exactly the answer most people expect. When people think about ancient Rome, they usually picture fearless legionaries charging across battlefields, shiny armor catching the sunlight, dramatic speeches, and emperors making life-changing decisions with a single wave of the hand. Hollywood has spent decades convincing us that Rome conquered the world because every Roman soldier apparently had the strength of 3 ordinary men and the jawline of a marble statue. Reality, as usual, was much more interesting. The average Roman legionary wasn't born a superhero. He probably grew up on a farm, complained about carrying heavy equipment, missed home, and wished his boots didn't feel like instruments specifically designed to torture feet. He wasn't stronger than every enemy he faced. He wasn't taller. He certainly wasn't invincible. So why did Rome keep winning? Because while everyone else was busy trying to create better warriors, Rome quietly built a better system. And systems have a funny habit of defeating heroes. Imagine 2 ancient armies preparing for battle. On one side, thousands of warriors are shouting at the top of their lungs, banging weapons against shields, trying to convince everyone, including themselves, that they aren't terrified. On the other side, silence. Thousands of Roman legionaries stand perfectly still. No screaming, no dramatic speeches, no one trying to look impressive. Just rows of shields, polished helmets, disciplined faces, and several thousand men waiting for one command. If you've ever been in a room where someone suddenly stops talking before delivering bad news, you know silence can be much scarier than noise. The Romans understood that long before psychologists gave it complicated names. Fear is contagious, but so is confidence, and nothing looks more confident than an army that doesn't feel the need to prove anything. Now here is something that would probably disappoint every movie director ever. Most Roman victories didn't begin with spectacular charges. They began months earlier, on a training field, not exactly blockbuster material. Picture hundreds of recruits repeatedly stabbing wooden posts. Not enemies, posts. Hour after hour, day after day, the wooden post never surrendered. It never complained, it simply absorbed thousands upon thousands of practice strikes. If someone asked a Roman instructor, when do we stop practicing this movement? The answer would probably have been, when you can do it perfectly while exhausted, hungry, terrified, and someone is trying very hard to kill you. Roman training wasn't designed to make soldiers look impressive. It was designed to make them almost impossible to surprise. Modern athletes call it muscle memory. The Romans simply called it Tuesday. Every movement had to become automatic. Raise the shield. Step forward, thrust with the gladius, return to formation. Repeat, again, and just when your arms felt ready to fall off. Again, was it boring? Absolutely. Did it save lives? Also absolutely. Because battlefields have one very inconvenient habit, they don't give you time to think. When arrows are falling from the sky and someone twice your size is sprinting toward you holding an axe, your brain isn't interested in philosophy. It wants survival. Whatever you've practiced 1,000 times becomes your first reaction. The Romans knew this. While other armies hoped courage would appear at exactly the right moment, Rome preferred something much more reliable. Preparation. There is an old saying that everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. The Romans would probably respond, that's exactly why we practiced getting punched in the face. Not literally, mostly. Discipline wasn't just about fighting. It infected every part of military life, every evening. After marching for miles carrying enough equipment to make a modern hiking backpack look adorable, Roman soldiers reached their destination. Normal people might think, fantastic, time to rest. The Romans thought, excellent, let us build a fortress, because apparently exhaustion was considered a scheduling suggestion rather than an actual physical condition. Every single evening they dug ditches, raised earth walls, placed sharpened stakes, organized streets, assigned guard positions, marked storage areas, positioned command tents. Everything had its place, everything. Imagine moving to a different hotel every night, but somehow every room is arranged exactly the same. That's essentially what the Roman army created. No confusion. No wandering around asking, has anyone seen the third cohort? Everyone already knew where everything belonged. Routine doesn't sound exciting, neither does wearing a seatbelt. Until the day it saves your life, the Romans loved routines because routines eliminate unnecessary decisions. And every decision you don't have to make is energy you can spend surviving tomorrow. Their enemies often slept wherever they happened to stop. The Romans slept inside fortresses they had built themselves only hours earlier. which meant that anyone hoping for a surprise attack first had to deal with walls, trenches, gates, guards, and several thousand soldiers who had actually managed to get a decent night's sleep. Suddenly, that midnight raid didn't seem like such a brilliant idea anymore. The Roman camp wasn't simply a place to sleep, it was a statement. It told every enemy watching from nearby hills, "We're planning to be here tomorrow." And if you don't like that, feel free to introduce yourself. That confidence came from something Rome understood better than almost anyone else: logistics. Now, I know the word logistics sounds about as exciting as reading text regulations carved into stone tablets. But here's the thing: logistics is the reason some armies become legends while others become archaeological discoveries. An army doesn't run on courage, it runs on food, lots of food. A Roman legionary could fight bravely all morning, but if he hadn't eaten for 3 days, suddenly philosophy about honor became much less convincing. Rome knew this. That's why every campaign looked less like an improvised adventure and more like a carefully organized moving city. Food, medical supplies, replacement weapons, construction tools, blacksmith equipment, engineers, doctors, surveyors, animal handlers, administrators. If you expected the Roman army to show up carrying nothing but swords and bad intentions, you were in for a surprise. The legion brought its own infrastructure. Imagine invading a country and bringing half your hometown with you. That's basically what Rome did. And then there were the roads. If there were an ancient world award for most underrated military weapon, roads would win every single year. Nobody writes epic movies about roads. Nobody walks into a cinema saying, "I really hope there's an emotional scene where engineers discuss proper drainage." Yet those roads quietly changed history. Roman roads ignored weather, ignored seasons, ignored excuses, while neighboring kingdoms struggled through muddy trails that disappeared every time it rained. Roman armies marched across stone highways built with astonishing precision. The phrase "all roads led to Rome" wasn't just poetic, it was practical. If trouble started hundreds of miles away, Rome could send an army before many enemies had even finished celebrating their rebellion. Imagine planning an uprising because you think reinforcements are months away. And then Roman standards appear on the horizon 3 weeks later. That must have been a deeply disappointing morning. Of course, roads don't build themselves. Roman engineers were some of the most impressive people in the ancient world. These weren't specialists sitting safely behind the front lines. Many were soldiers. One day they were marching, the next day they were building bridges. The day after that they might be operating siege engines. And somehow they still found time to dig another trench before dinner. It is honestly exhausting just talking about them. One of the greatest examples happened when Julius Caesar reached the Rhine River. Most commanders looked at rivers the way normal people look at locked doors, a temporary inconvenience. Caesar looked at the Rhine and apparently thought, "Let us build a bridge, not eventually, not next month." His engineers constructed an enormous wooden bridge in about 10 days. 10 days. Some enemies were probably still debating whether the Romans could cross the river, while Roman soldiers were already waving from the opposite bank. Imagine spending weeks preparing defenses because you believe nature is protecting you, only to discover that the Romans considered nature another engineering project. Mountain, cut through it. River, bridge it. Forest, build a road. Swamp, find a way across. At some point, the landscape itself probably started feeling nervous. And if engineering wasn't enough, Roman siege warfare took patience to an entirely different level. Other armies often looked at a fortified city and thought, "Let us attack." The Romans looked at the same walls and thought, "Let us make living inside impossible." Instead of wasting thousands of soldiers climbing walls under a rain of arrows, they surrounded cities, cut supply lines, blocked water, built towers taller than the walls, constructed battering rams, dug tunnels, launched giant stones from ballistae. They weren't trying to win quickly. They were trying to convince defenders that resistance had become mathematically pointless. Imagine waking up every morning to discover the Romans had built something else overnight. Yesterday there was a ditch, today there's a tower, tomorrow there's another wall. Next week they've somehow surrounded your entire city with fortifications larger than your city. At that point, surrender starts looking surprisingly reasonable. The Siege of Alesia remains one of those moments that sounds fictional until you realize historians keep confirming it actually happened. Caesar had trapped a massive Gallic army inside a fortified hilltop settlement. Then came the bad news: another enormous Gallic army was marching to rescue them. Now, most generals would have experienced what we politely call a very stressful afternoon. Caesar had a different solution. He ordered his soldiers to build another wall. Actually, 2 walls. one facing inward to keep the trapped army inside, the second facing outward to stop the relief force. Think about that for a second. The Romans intentionally placed themselves between two hostile armies, then built fortifications facing both directions that ask either extraordinary confidence or complete madness. Fortunately for Rome, it turned out to be confidence backed by engineering. When attacks came from inside and outside simultaneously, the Roman defenses held. Not because the soldiers were magically stronger, because they had prepared for exactly this kind of nightmare. Preparation kept defeating improvisation again and again and again. That's one of the biggest misconceptions about Roman history. People often imagine Rome winning because everything always went according to plan. Not even close. Things went wrong constantly. Storms happened. Supplies disappeared. Generals made mistakes, scouts brought bad information, bridges collapsed. Entire campaigns turned into disasters. The difference was never perfection. The difference was recovery. Rome had an almost stubborn refusal to stay defeated. Lose one battle, raise another army, lose two, train harder, lose three. Change tactics. Their attitude toward failure sounded remarkably modern. Instead of asking, whose fault was this, they usually asked, what did we learn? That's an incredibly dangerous mindset for your enemies, because defeating Rome once rarely solved the problem. It simply created a better version of Rome for the next campaign. Then came Hannibal. If Rome were an action movie, Hannibal would be the villain everyone secretly rooted for. Not because he was evil, because he was brilliant. Crossing the Alps with tens of thousands of soldiers was already considered impossible. Crossing them with war elephants sounded like someone had misunderstood the assignment entirely. Imagine being a Roman scout. You ride back to headquarters. The general asks, "What is the enemy doing?" You answer, "Well, they were bringing elephants over the mountains." The silence in that tent must have been unforgettable, and somehow it worked. Hannibal didn't simply defeat Roman armies. He dismantled them at Trebia, at Lake Trasimene, and finally at Cannae, where one of the greatest tactical masterpieces in military history unfolded. The Romans marched on to the battlefield confident in their numbers. Hannibal looked at those numbers and politely used them against them. His troops surrounded the Roman army from every direction. What began as confidence quickly turned into panic. By the end of the day, tens of thousands of Roman soldiers lay dead. Even today, military academies still study the Battle of Cannae. Not because anyone wants to repeat it, but because everyone wants to avoid becoming the Romans. If there was ever a moment when the Roman Republic had every reason to surrender, this was it. Imagine waking up in Rome after hearing the news. Your largest army had effectively disappeared. Entire noble families had lost sons. Allies began questioning whether Rome could still protect them. Neighboring kingdoms sensed weakness. The future suddenly looked very uncertain. Many civilizations would have opened peace negotiations immediately. Rome did something almost absurd. It started recruiting again. Old man, welcome. Teenagers, grab a shield. Former slaves willing to fight. Here's your chance to earn freedom. Blacksmiths worked around the clock. Training grounds filled with fresh recruits. Weapons poured out of workshops. The Republic didn't spend its energy asking whether recovery was possible. It assumed recovery was mandatory. That's an extraordinary psychological difference. Rome refused to believe one disaster defined its future. And eventually, it didn't. Years later, the war reached North Africa. Now Hannibal found himself defending his homeland instead of threatening someone else's. Waiting for him was another remarkable Roman commander, Scipio Africanus. Unlike many leaders driven by revenge, Scipio wasn't interested in dramatic speeches about settling old scores. He wanted results. He carefully studied Hannibal, learned his methods, anticipated his strengths, then quietly built a plan around them. The most famous challenge, the elephants. By now they had become legendary. Towering animals crashing into infantry formations sounded terrifying. Unless you simply gave them nowhere useful to crash. Instead of arranging his soldiers in one massive solid line, Scipio left carefully planned corridors between his units. When the elephants charged, they found open lanes instead of tightly packed legionaries. Roman trumpets blasted, soldiers shouted, the elephants panicked. Several turned around, straight back into Hannibal's own army. There's something wonderfully ironic about watching your greatest weapon become your biggest problem. Scipio hadn't defeated the elephants with bigger elephants. He defeated them with planning. That's another recurring theme throughout Roman history. Preparation usually beat improvisation again and again. Roman commanders loved information almost as much as they loved roads. Before campaigns even began, scouts disappeared into unfamiliar territory. Merchants were questioned, local guides were interviewed, prisoners were interrogated, maps were drawn, water sources identified, escape routes examined, potential ambush locations noted. A Roman general hated surprises, not because surprises were impossible, because every surprise increased risk, and risk had an unpleasant tendency to get expensive. Julius Caesar became particularly famous for this. He gathered information constantly. Some commanders waited until battle to understand their opponents. Caesar preferred arriving already knowing what they were likely to do. Imagine playing chess against someone who had spent weeks studying your previous games while you barely knew their name. That's roughly the advantage intelligence created, but perhaps the smartest Roman habit involved something almost invisible. Reserves. Hollywood battles usually show everyone charging forward immediately. Looks exciting. Terrible strategy. Roman commanders